Hello, and welcome to McDude Project. What you're looking at is a Japanese Ki-45 heavy fighter, allied codename Nick, sitting under a 90-foot tall Christmas tree. The Nick had its first flight in 1939. It was not accepted by the Japanese Army until February of 1942. First saw combat a few months later. The aircraft scrambled to intercept the Doolittle raid. It failed to intercept the bombers. It later saw combat, within a month or two, it saw combat against P-40s of the Flying Tigers in China. A few months after that, it would see combat against P-40s of the Royal Australian Air Force. It actually was no match for the P-40, which largely just proved a concept that twin-engine long-range escorts. This aircraft was envisioned as a twin-engine escort, a long-range escort for Japanese bombers. These aircraft were simply not capable of dealing with single-engine fighters. There were lots of air forces that had embraced the twin-engine fighter concept. It was seen as the best chance for having some form of long-range escort for long-range bombers. Problem being that once they arrived over the target, they did not encounter twin-engine aircraft. Instead, they encountered single-engine fighters, which simply ran rings around them. As it turned out, the Ki-45 was very, very good at ground strike. It was a very good attack aircraft against anti-aircraft sites, armored formations, shipping items of that such. But it was never really came into its own as a fighter plane. Not until the B-29 showed up. The aircraft had fairly good high-altitude performance. And when the B-29 showed up over Japan, Ki-45s armed with heavy armament, heavy cannons, were sent to intercept the B-29s. And that was pretty much the best the Ki-45 ever did. Personally, as a bomber pilot in War Thunder, the Ki-45 was the first fighter plane that I tried to fly. I was attracted to bombers immediately, but every now and then I would try out the fighter side. I found that the heavy fighters I adapted to a lot easier and quicker than the smaller fighters. So when I saw the challenge that appeared, the Winter Magic Challenge, I was naturally inclined to use the Japanese Heavy Fighter Corps to go for it. So exactly what was the Winter Magic Challenge? This is a Tupolev TB-3 heavy bomber. It was designed by Andrei Tupolev and became operational in 1932. The aircraft was retired in 1939 and was considered obsolete before the start of World War II. However, as the Soviets were desperate for aircraft, they kept the TB-3 in service. It served both as a heavy bomber, as a transport, and a variety of other roles throughout the war. They had built over 800 of them before the aircraft was retired. So they had plenty of aircraft and plenty of spare parts to keep the aircraft in service throughout the war. After the war ended in 1945, there were still 10 TB-3s in service, and the Russians decided to honor the aircraft's service with the Soviet Air Force by having it fly in the victory parades. A formation of 3 aircraft flew over Moscow in the victory parades after the end of the war. During the war, the aircraft, while serving in the heavy bomber role, had been chopped up by the Luftwaffe during daylight bombing raids and had to resort to nighttime bombing raids, which is where a majority of the strategic strikes were done. One of the unique things about this aircraft is that unlike most aircraft of that time period, this airplane was not built out of sheet aluminum. The Soviet aluminum industry only began to take off in 1932, the year that this aircraft became operational. As a result, the aircraft was built out of what's known as sheet steel, which is considerably heavier than sheet aluminum. So the result was that the aircraft was a lot heavier than other aircraft of its time period. Another issue was a lack of quality control amongst Soviet factories at the time. Often this resulted in larger positive tolerances. That is, the aircraft was typically 10 to 12% heavier because the sheet steel rods and wires were often 10 to 12% larger than they were supposed to be. So the result is that the average aircraft could weigh as much as 2,000 pounds more than the prototypes were. And this adversely affected performance within the fleet. It made the aircraft a lot heavier, and it made them a lot slower. This was one of the more interesting things I find about this aircraft is that it really operated with this deficiency, and it operated quite well with it. Anyway, because of these various historical uniqueness of the aircraft, I was compelled to pursue it. Now, unfortunately, I found out about this Winter Magic Challenge too late, or I should say I took it seriously too late. I had seen the challenges before, and I kind of ignored them because the closed beta tests for the closed beta tank tests were just so ridiculous. I looked at all those challenges, and they were just so weird that I gave up on even attempting to get into closed beta tanks. So when I saw this, I just didn't take it seriously until one day when I saw the photos, and the aircraft was just so unique, so beautiful, so historically fascinating. I had to try, but when I read on the website, I realized that I was too late getting involved in this. So because I was too late, because I wouldn't get enough challenges done, I realized I wouldn't get the plane. But regardless, I decided to go ahead and pursue this as a personal challenge to see if I could pull this off. Remember, again, I'm a bomber pilot. I rarely fly fighters. And when I do, I fly the heavy fighters, either the Japanese Ki-45 Nick or the British Beaufighter. So I really don't have a lot of experience as a fighter pilot. So I saw this as a unique challenge that I wanted to pursue just to see if I could. That said, here we go. This is the beginning of my personal challenge of bomber pilot trying to make it as a fighter pilot. I hope you like it. So my first mission landed me on the Grave Robbers Cliff maps. After flying around for 2 minutes in heavy cloud cover, I finally came across G4M1 Betty medium bomber, red team. Unfortunately, it was coming under attack by 2 of our own team members, who no doubt were interested in the challenge as much as I was. I quickly decided that this was probably not something I wanted to get involved in, and I just got out of the way. I then decided to continue on my flight, hampered by a lot of cloud cover. I'm not a fan of all these clouds that Gaijin likes to put in these maps. It makes it very hard to find targets. Makes it very hard to know where I am. Also is neither realistic nor accurate. I mean, yes, clouds are real, but a lot of air wars just weren't fought in heavy cloud cover. especially during World War II. Anyway, fast forwarding a little bit, after about 5 or 6 more minutes of cruising around at high altitude, I come across a 86K Mavis. It's the long-range 4-engine amphibious aircraft. I get a couple of hits on it, swing around, get ready to intercept it again. The view you're looking at is using the replay, and I try to keep the target in the camera at all times in the replay. Unfortunately, I dropped down because I was coming under fire from the aircraft's tail 20mm cannon. When I came back up, I had effectively lost the aircraft. So, moving on. So, I spent the next 5 minutes or so, maybe a little longer, cruising around at high altitude looking for targets. I came upon one target, but it was very quickly attacked by one of my teammates. I think it was a Catalina. I'm not really sure, but let's face it, there were a lot of people out that day looking for bombers to shoot down, trying to fulfill the TB-3 challenge. So I knew I would be, sometimes I would be on time to hit a target, and sometimes I would be a little late. So moving on, the next thing I found was a PBY Catalina. Catalina is one of my favorite airplanes. So, as you might imagine, I don't really feel all that great about shooting the thing down, but hey, a challenge is a challenge. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experience as a fighter pilot. Like I said before, I usually fly bombers. So, whether I'm lining aircraft up from behind or from front, I'm just not really very good at using the target reticle. Since I'm a joystick user, I get a very small target reticle. So after taking a few shots and missing, I swing around, come under fire from the Catalina's waist gunners. The KI-45 is not the most maneuverable aircraft in the world. Actually, it's not very maneuverable at all. It is fast, and it can sport a rather powerful offensive armament, but it's just not very maneuverable. But after maneuvering into position, I line myself up for a bow shot on the Catalina, open up with a 37mm, and cut her wing off. And that's my first kill towards the challenge. So now it's time to swing around and find another target. So after circling around for close to 10 minutes and realizing there were just no more bombers to hunt down at a high altitude, I decided, against my better judgment, to bring the aircraft down to low altitude. That 3,000 to 4,000 feet range that everybody was slaughtering each other in. To do this, I had to enter a valley that was covered with these finger-like rock formations. My target, the only bomber I was aware of, was an IL-4 on the opposite side of the valley. And I had just entered the valley when I came under attack. I looked behind me, but I never really did identify my attacker. Instead, I decided to just pour on the coal and get out of dodge. Weaving between these finger-like rock formations. At one point, I was flying at 328 miles an hour, about this point, and decided to go over the mountain instead of go around it. Then dropped down into a valley with a little bit of damage to the port engine. With nobody following me, I decided that I would head for the base. My base really wasn't that far away. And there I could rearm and refuel, repair the aircraft. At the big hill here, I chopped power and made a sharp turn to starboard to make straight in for the runway. Unfortunately, I made the turn a little too sharp. And I'm still moving pretty fast here. I had a fair amount of airspeed to bleed off. So I banked to the left before heading back into the runway. Drop the landing gear. Drop the flaps. Just before touchdown, I yawed in to line up with the runway. Touchdown was very fast, and I quickly ran out of runway. In fact, I overshot the runway and ended up in a field on this side of the airport. I'm in the field now. That is a Year 2 attack on the airfield. A Year 2 was alone. I looked for it. You couldn't really find it. And in the middle of the field, I ended up hitting the right brake, spin the aircraft around a couple times just to bleed off my speed, settle the aircraft down, and not end up crashing into the forest. So, the second mission, this time, I'm not really sure which map this is. I don't think it's a real map. I think it's one of the phony maps with a lot of mountains, which you guys should recognize at some point. Anyway, there's a Wellington closing in on the base. And this guy, and you know, once again, I have a slight problem with lining up my shots on approach. You can see all the mountains there with the river crossing in between. Anyway, this guy brings this Wellington out like it's a fighter plane. I managed to score a couple of hits on him. He goes into this radical dive. And as usual, you know, one of my problems with the Ki-45 is it's a very fast airplane. So I'm coming in kind of hot. So I try to bleed off some airspeed so I don't get too close to him. But he's already made a move quite a distance away. There's a couple of the teammates who've decided to target him. At least two other teammates, maybe three. There's a Lavishkin LA-5, which is going to start becoming rather prominent soon. In fact, I think that there he is, down in the beneath me a moment ago. Anyway, and there this guy goes again. He's really ringing out this Wellington. They're just, I mean, you can tell those arcade battles because Wellingtons were just never, under any circumstances, ever able to fly like this. But he gets out ahead of me with the Lavishkin on his tail. And we're both jockeying for shots. And at one point, I run out of ammunition. So I kind of have to hang behind him a little bit, just stay in the mix. There goes another one of the guys after him. I chop power a little bit while I regain it, reload ammo. Swing around, only to find that the Wellington and the LA-5 have both taken each other out. I don't know what happened to the third aircraft. So anyway, I swing the aircraft around, try to get my bearings a little bit. Now, all this time I've been aware of a B-17 that's been patrolling up and down the valley off to my right. And he's been hitting armored vehicles. I don't know how quickly he reloads. I get the idea he reloads pretty fast because he's been bombing armored vehicles quite a bit. There's the valley ahead of me. It's full of armored vehicles. Although, maybe not anymore now that he's been dealing with them. I try putting my rounds out in front of him. And, of course, I'm coming in too fast. I didn't get a good beat on him. I try to bleed off some excess airspeed. Swing the aircraft around. I don't know who did all that damage to the airfield. The B-17 heads out over the port, where he does a spectacular hit on a cargo ship. I close in on him. And made a couple of rounds in. Now the Wellington ended up as an enemy assist. The B-17, I don't know if it was an enemy assist or not, I don't remember. I know this one guy, there he is, swooped in, a teammate, hit the B-17 in the engine. And he tried pulling away, but by this time there was so much friendly fire coming in on this B-17, I just didn't want to get shot down by any of my own teammates. So I pulled away. Third battle. Still only one kill towards my goal. Almost immediately after beginning this battle, I had a Messerschmitt 410 directly ahead of me. Good practice for getting his rounds out in front of someone. He didn't need that aileron anyway. I swing the aircraft around, try to finish him off, but somebody else has already done that for me. So I'm off to look for more targets, only to become one myself. The aircraft behind me is a P-39. I immediately go inverted, pull into a split S. P-39 in hot pursuit. He follows me in, so I go inverted and go into another split S, just as my tail gunner finishes him off. Coming out of the split S, I level off. Plenty of altitude to spare. And continue on my hunt. I didn't bother to land to fix the aircraft because, well, I didn't really know where my airbase was. Maybe I was just too far away from it. So I find myself witnessing a battle between a B-25 and one of my teammates. B-25 just finished off my teammate. He turns in towards me. I'm rather confident I can get him. Start firing the cannons. And I was wrong. We're now into mission number 4. This is the Pearl Harbor map. And we're closing in on a number of enemy aircraft. There was this Heinkel 111 that was looking like a juicy target. And I took a couple of shots at it, only to have him go into this rather steep and radical dive. Not to mention a couple of people shooting over my shoulder, who turned out to be teammates just trying to hog in on the kill. I followed this guy in, and this was a very steep, very fast dive. I was almost 350 miles an hour, and I decided to just break off. Because even once that 111 pulls out of his dive, he's going to end up over in an area that always has a massive furball in it of aircraft trying to kill each other. So I head out over the ocean, swing back in, wondering if the 111 is still alive. It's not. I didn't see any signs of it. That's Pearl Harbor directly ahead. However, once again, I found myself under attack. Yeah. And that is a Lavachkin LA-5. Yet again. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I really hate these communist airplanes. What you're looking at is a Kawasaki Ki-96 Interceptor. It was a prototype aircraft. The Kawasaki built about 3 of these in 1942. They initially built the aircraft on their own, and they were 2-place aircraft like the Ki-45, designed to replace the airplane. And later, when the Japanese Army showed interest in it, they began, the Japanese Army insisted that they change the aircraft into a single-seat airplane. And that's where the Ki-96 was born. Only 3 prototypes were built, and they were actually quite useful. They performed very, very well. But the Japanese Army changed their requirements back to a 2-seat aircraft, and Kawasaki abandoned the Ki-96 project. Anyway, at this point in the game, I am pursuing an IL-4 that is flying, it's about 1.64 miles away. I've been pursuing it for a while now. So much so that I'm beginning to get nervous, so I have to check behind me to see what's going on. After realizing my 6 o'clock is clear, I continue on the hunt. Again, the aircraft remains 1.64 miles away, which I find rather odd after a while. Getting back to the airplane, the Ki-96 is a premium aircraft. You have to pay for it. And, which I think all prototypes, if you have to drag prototypes into War Thunder, which I'm not really a fan of doing, then by all means they should be premium aircraft. Regardless. Anyway, getting back to the hunt. This dragged on for a while. And with lots of information coming up in the updates in the lower right corner, and stuff coming over the radio. After a while, I took a couple of practice shots. That's at a range of 1.5 miles, and yet the target continued to fly away. And about this time, I came to the realization he was flying off the map to avoid getting shot down. And he just kept going until the game was over. So, that is part one of bomber pilot's attempt to act like a fighter pilot and bring down 5 planes to achieve the TB-3 challenge. This presentation was brought to you by McDude and a bottle of Goldschlager. If you enjoyed it, then please feel free to click the appropriate buttons and say appropriate things. If you didn't enjoy it, then click the inappropriate buttons. Say inappropriate things. And I'll catch you next time.